Hello and welcome to another 140k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now before we get into today's video, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Eric Cruzat for sending in these awesome pictures of his Imperial Guard army. 5 super heavies, 3 Baneblades and 2 Marauders, an absolutely beautiful sight to behold, and the opponent they were facing off against as well, a Deathcore Krieg army, looks absolutely amazing. So massive thank you to Eric, massive thank you to his opponent for sending in some awesome pictures of their battle. It looks really good. So thank you guys. If anyone else has got any cool pictures you want me to use in my videos, please post them on my Facebook page, or you can email them to me at mordianglorytv@gmail.com. Without further ado, let's crack on with today's video. So today guys, I want to talk about hyper durable units. You see, as the lethality of 9th edition has gone on with inevitable certainty, GW has started to try and counter this with increasing the durability of a lot of factions and the new codexes. And we started seeing the rise of multiple big durability buffs that can be stacked onto units. So we had things like transhuman, and then we obviously had the classic sort of -1 to hit, but now we're seeing things like -1 to wound, and then we're seeing not just transhuman for wounding, but what people are calling trans hit, where you can only hit the opponent on a 4+ as well. So you've got all these abilities. So in the new Chaos Codex, for example, there's a big block of Terminators that people are talking about where you can give them -1 to hit, -1 to wound. They can only be wounded, they're going to be hit on a 4+. There's this, that, there's loads and loads of buffs. And essentially, we're seeing this in a lot of armies, these ability to create massively durable big bricks of doom. In a recent battle report that I did, and I'll link at the end of this video, I took on a unit of Grey, and not just a unit, an army of Grey Knights, and they had a massive Paladin bomb. It was a really big squad of Paladins, all the durability buffs, no way I was going to get through that unit. And so what I thought would be a good video to do is let's talk about how we deal with these really big units, because there's lots of ways you can deal with them, but essentially it comes down to, in my opinion, there are 3 main ways of dealing with these big units. So without further ado, let's take a look at the ways of dealing with the Unkillable Deathstars. So one of the first ways you can deal with these big unkillable bricks is by ignoring them, which sounds crazy, right? But hear me out. You'll find a lot of advice like this on the internet. People say if someone's got an unkillable unit, it can't be everywhere at once. So just ignore it. Do what people call, I think, in the video game sphere, do what you call kiting it. Essentially, just drive around it, kill everything around it, and then it will just be left there. And it can only hold like 1 or maybe 2 objectives at most. So if you can just kill everything around it, play the objective game, not play the game that it wants to play, then essentially your opponent might have tied up more than a quarter of his army in a big Deathstar that actually ends up doing very little. Now, this is a totally viable tactic, but there's something really important to remember, and this is kind of something you're going to have to remember when you're going throughout the video, which is not all unkillable Deathstars are the same. Some of them are pure durability. Some of them are, I'm just really durable, I don't have huge damage output, but I have good close combat capabilities, so I want to get into you and then tear you to pieces, and that's my kind of jam, and you're going to put all your firepower into me, and so then the rest of my army is going to win the game. Now, this whole ignoring it thing works for some big, durable, unkillable Deathstars, because, like I said, a lot of them, you look at like the Terminator one or the Grey Knight one especially, it doesn't have great long-range damage output. Grey Knight Paladin bombs it's a lot of bolters, and yeah, you can probably put some like storm bolter, side bolt ammunition, or some other crazy stuff on there. I don't know, but the point is, it's just storm bolters, and so for a lot of us, you can kind of just ignore it because you don't care about storm bolters. But that's not always true. Sometimes your particular army composition will be at risk, even to just storm bolters. I mean, if you're running a pure infantry army, storm bolters are really good against you. You don't want to let a big unit with loads and loads of bolters just blaze away, picking up 2 or 3 or 4 squads a turn. That Terminator blob is actually doing not only a good job of holding objectives and stuff, but also it's denying you one of your big advantages, which is it can kill lots of infantry. So sometimes it's not totally viable based on your army build, and sometimes you might come across another big unkillable kind of unit that you can't not kill. You can't just kite around it, because it's not only unkillable, but it has really good firepower. Now, a secondary part, this could almost be a 0.4, but I'm going to call it sort of a 0.1, 0.5, is Not only can you just sort of ignore these things, these big unkillable units, and drive around them and kill the rest of the army, you can also tie them up with chaff. And so rather than engaging it with the main part of your army, you can screen these things out, especially if they're more of a combat based one, and you can basically make them only fight little crappy shit units that you don't really care if they die or not. So what you're doing, the reason why I combine those two into sort of one area is because you kind of, what you're doing there is you're not letting the unkillable death blob do what it wants to do. You are making it play your game. So there's kind of like a 0.1 and a 0.1.5 there. Now, great units for stuff like this are like, you've got infantry squads, you've got conscript blobs. Because remember, you can take a big blob conscript, you can start putting your own defensive buffs on it and all that kind of stuff. And so suddenly, your cheaper little chaff unit of conscripts is now actually annoyingly difficult for this blob of terminators to shoot through or charge through or anything. So you can ignore them or you can tie them up with chaff. Either way, you're making them waste their time and you're not engaging them in the game that they want to play. So those are sort of the first point and a half. But let's take a look at another way that you can deal with these big unkillable blobs. So the next way you can deal with these things is by leveraging mortal wounds, spamming as many mortal wounds as you can get your hands on. You see, it doesn't matter if someone can only be hit on a 4+, can only be wounded on a 4+, -1 to hit, -1 to wound, 2+ save, armor of contempt, 4+ invulnerable save. It doesn't matter if they've got all those things. Mortal wounds, just ignore all of that. A lot of people don't like mortal wounds, but I think they're kind of a fundamental mechanic for actually balancing out a lot of these unkillable Deathstars. And you've got to be careful that, you don't let too many mortal wounds become a thing in the game from a mechanics point of view. Yeah, of course, but my point is that mortal wounds are there for a reason. They're there for this exact scenario, to stop people from being able to layer all these buffs on and for you to be able to counter them. Now, Guard actually get access to a hell of a lot of different sources of mortal wounds and psychic powers. I mean, in our codex alone, we have 3 psychic units. We have the good old Primaris Psyker, the good old Faithful Ashpath, and then the kind of crappy Weird Vein Psychers. But they do have their place if you're going down this whole spamming mortal wound shenanigans. So we have access to those 3 in our own codex, and then we can quite happily take into account an extra source of mortal wounds via an Inquisitor. So one tactic that I kind of have used a lot on this channel, or talked about on this channel, is the double smite Inquisitor, where you take an auto minus Inquisitor, he's 60 points, you make him a Psyker, you make it so he can cast 2 powers a turn, and so he then can do Castigation, which is like a targeted smite, but it's not smite, and then he can do smite as well. So that's 60 points for 2 sources of mortal wounds. Now, you should really get both of those off because they're both pretty low level powers, both I think power level 5 or 6, and then that's 2d3 mortal wounds from just one model. Then take into account you've got in your own codex 2 sources of mortal wounds from your psychic powers. You've got Gaze the Emperor and you've got Psychic Maelstrom. So again, those are sources of mortal wounds. Each time, each one of those on average should be doing like 2 or 3 mortal wounds a time. And then you've just got good old-fashioned smite. Now, some of you might be saying, yeah, but MG, every time I cast smite, it gets harder. Yeah, it does, but then you go to the greater good and you get access to the Psychic Choir stratagem, which allows you to give a unit of Weird Vein Psychers +2 to cast and a Primaris Psyker +2 to cast. So, and it's not just for Imperial Guard psychic powers that +2 counts to. It's all psychic powers. So suddenly you can do, if you think about this, if your Inquisitor does a smite, and then your another source, another Primaris Psyker, let's say, does a smite. Now it's on power level 6 now. Only a 50-50 chance of getting it off power level 7. Oh, that's not too bad, because guess what? I'll do Psychic Choir. I'll do a smite from another Primaris Psyker. Now that would be on a 7, but I get +2 to cast, so it's on a 5. Oh, and then I'll take a big blob of Weird Vein Psychers. So yeah, they only get to roll 1d6, but they're on like what, +5 to cast now. So that's a guaranteed another source of smite there. Even if you roll a 1, you get it off on a power level 6. So that's what, like 5 smites. You've got smite from Inquisitor, smite from another. It's like 4 or 5 smites going off there. That's quite a lot of mortal wounds just blazing out, having a great time. So there's loads of different sources you can get for getting your smites off. And I'm sure there's better ways of configuring it than I've talked about. Maybe, if you cast the smites in a certain order, and you take multiple units of Weird Vein Psychers, then you'll be able to really maximize it and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure there are. But all I'm saying is, like, you can spam Mortal Wounds as guard if you want to. And even if it starts getting crazy, you even start looking at things like, going down the Gene Stealer cult route, and then they've got more psychic powers you can take advantage of. Combine those like your little 500 points of Brood Brothers to get even more psychic powers. There's loads of ways that guard and guard-like armies can absolutely spam Mortal Wounds if they so desire. So that is one way of countering these big unkillable Death Stars, just psychically melt their brains. However, there is a counter to this, which is firstly, psychic powers can be denied. So you've got to bear that in mind. And secondly, you've got to take into account that there's a lot of sources of like 5+ feel no pain against Mortal Wounds now. Now, let me tell you, I would much rather my opponent only got a 5+ to try and stop my Mortal Wounds than he has all these other defensive buffs, but it's something to take into account. Now, there are a couple of other sources of Mortal Wounds in the Guard Codex, but both of these are non-psychic, which has an advantage, means they can't be countered by being denied, but the problem is that they're not great sources of Mortal Wounds. The first one is the Death Strike missile. It's relatively cheap, but if it goes off, you'll be lucky, right? So it's worth a mention, but it's not really worth a mention. So it does exist. I'm mentioning it because it exists, but I'm not really taking it into account when it comes to how am I going to count these unkillable Death Stars. That's just how I roll. Now, the other thing to mention is, of course, you have sniper rifles as well. But again, snipers aren't great. Snipers as a whole kind of need a bit of a rework in late 9th, 10th edition, whatever we end up doing. They need a bit of a rework. However, Guard have recently got access to some fairly affordable sniper rifles. I mean, you get them for free on your veterans now, and your special weapons squads. I mean, they already had them for free, but you get them for free on your special weapons squads as well. And I guess at the end of the day, special weapons squads are already hitting on 4, so if someone's got some whole, like, you can only hit me on a 4+ shenanigans going off, it's like, okay, that's fine, but I was only hitting on 4s anyway. So it's something to be aware of, but my favourite sources of Mortal Wounds, my preferred source of Mortal Wounds are from Psychers. They just seem a lot more reliable, a lot better. But it would be remiss of me not to mention these other things. They do exist. And of course, there's access to all sorts of like bombs and other things that you can get. I'm sure there's sources of Mortal Wounds that I have missed. But I'm sort of these are the ones that sort of spring to mind for me. If there's any sources that you think I have missed, that you think are of particular noteworthy, please put them down in the comment section below, because it'd be cool. I'm going to be doing a video on how to spam as many Mortal Wounds and do it properly in detail. I've only hinted at it today, but I will be doing a video on that. And so I'd love to know all the other ways you can spam Mortal Wounds. It'd be really cool to see how many Guard can really chuck out in a turn if they try. So that's the second way of dealing with these unkillable Death Stars. But let's take a look at kind of the third and final way. Now, the third and final way of Guard dealing with these unkillable things is kind of risky and it's kind of crazy, but you could just try and kill them. Now, Morning Glory, what the hell are you talking about? You just said these things are unkillable Death Stars. Well, yeah, they are, but bear with me 1 second, guys. I mean, if you've got some unit that you can only hit it on 4s and you can't reroll to hit against it anyway, and it's -1 to hit and all this kind of stuff, and it's got transhuman, all this kind of crazy stuff, like, yeah, okay, fine, that's fair enough. But right now, as of time of recording this video, Imperial Guard have access to Hammer of the Emperor. And Hammer of the Emperor, it don't really care about all of these things. If you hit on a 6, you auto wound. And so I was facing in my last tournament, I was using this regularly in Russes, and they only hit a 4 anyway. I mean, that's something else to mention, right? Like, this whole you only hit me on 4s thing is really a lot more crippling for other armies than Guard. Like, we're the Guard. We've only been hitting you on 4s anyway, mate. Like, a lot of the time, we've been hitting you on 5s because we've been going through like dense terrain and some other shenanigans. So like, I'm not actually that bothered about you having this whole can only hit me on 4s, whole transit thing. It's annoying, but it's not anything really new to me, right? The reroll, the not being able to reroll is a bit more of a bigger deal, but Guard, unless we're facing something, I mean, to be fair, we can't use Vengeance for Cadia against that big Chaos Terminator block because we can't re-roll the hits, but it's just something to be aware of. But a lot of the time, apart from that, we don't really have access to a huge amounts of like full re-rolls or anything like that. We typically hit on 4s, and maybe we'll get to reroll some 1s. So the thing is, guys, is that Guard has access to Hammer of the Emperor, and we also have access to just an absolute shitload of firepower. And so there is always, and this will entirely depend on how you built your list, but you could just fucking go for it. You could just be like, you could be like, you think you're an Unkillable Deathstar? Challenge accepted. Now, this is obviously hyper risky because you're playing the game that the Deathstar wants to play, and you're kind of trying to pull the big flex on it and the big brain maneuver, and you're kind of pulling your big fucking dick out and you're trying to swing it around and I'm like, look, I'm gonna kill the unkillable thing. It's risky. You're playing the game it wants to play. You're doing what it wants to do, and if it doesn't pay off, then you've just handed over the initiative to your opponent and you're not having a good time. But, you know, like I said, if you manage to pull it off, you are going to massively pull the game into your favour. Massively. So it's a risky manoeuvre, I'm not going to lie. But look, we've got Demarche cannons, we've got auto wounding on 6s, we've got Scions with it now. We've got, as mentioned before, you could combine this whole I'm going to shoot it to death with this whole I'm going to mortal wound it to death, and maybe you'll get it. Maybe you'll kill it. At the very least, if you can, I'd say if you reckon you've got the firepower that you can cripple these units in 1 turn and finish them off in the 2nd turn, it's probably worth going for, because then you get 3 more turns to just pick up the rest of the enemy army. So it's certainly something to be aware of, but I cannot stress it enough, guys. It's a hyper risky strategy, but if you think you can do it, hey, give it a go. And if it doesn't work out and you lose, well, guess what? You've now learnt something, which is just as valuable. If you try it the first time and it doesn't go off, hey, tuck that knowledge into the back of the brain, and next time you come across it, you'll know how to beat it the next time. Just one of those things to be aware of, guys. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you have, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe and a comment and all that good stuff. I'll be honest with you, any extra interactivity you give this video gives it a big boost. So that's really, really good for me. So please consider doing all that kind of good stuff. And if you do, massive thank you. I do really, really appreciate it. I also want to say a massive thank you to all of our channel members and Patreon supporters. It is thanks to the channel members, it is thanks to the Patreon supporters that Mordian Glory has been going from strength to strength, that I can go to tournaments, that I can bring back frontline observations, all that kind of good stuff, try out crazy units and new tactics and all that stuff. So massive thank you to all of the channel members and all of the Patreon supporters. I want us to give a few shout outs to our latest supporters. So massive thank you to Ian Hawkins, Paul Savage, Panzerkampfwagen Baneblade, Trichroma, Castellan, Strike F3 and Justin Hoagie for joining the channel and becoming members. Massive thank you guys, really appreciate the support and thank you for doing your part. I also want to say a big thank you to our Patreon supporters. So massive thank you to Alex Stengal, Gankistani, Ben Thorne, Alon Harfin, Marcus Roberts and Timber de Jägermeister for being our most recent Patreon supporters. I also want to do a personal, heartfelt thank you to all of our top tier Patreon supporters. These are the people that have gone above and beyond the call of duty when it comes to supporting the Mordian Glory channel, and they've just been incredibly generous. So massive thank you to August Varney, Alex Stengal, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh and Swordfish Trombone for being signed up at the Lord General level. This is the top tier of Patreon support and it truly is incredibly generous. And I also want to say a special thank you to all of our commissars, those people which have signed up at another really high level of Patreon support. So massive thank you to Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton and Ross Miller for being signed up at the commissar level. You're all truly wonderful people. Thank you for your generous support. But that's all we've got time for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and as always, I'll see you guys next time.